functions, and that poetic language can actually reach into the unseen and reveal things to us. But the other part that makes it so hard for us is that there was an inversion about 200 years ago in the way that man thought. And basically it was this: the object of man's contemplation now is himself, okay? But back then it was nature, the creation. The creation was considered to be the revelation of God to us, and it was man's job to decode it, okay? Because God speaks to man. He speaks to man a lot of different ways, but one of the ways he speaks to man is through beauty. That's what Dostoevsky meant when he said beauty will save the world. When people are depressed, I give them an assignment, an exercise. And part of this, 3 elements to the exercise, and one of the elements is, well, basically, you got to walk, go to a place that has some good nature. Don't go to an industrial park. Go somewhere else. Your neighborhood, if you live in a nice neighborhood with trees, okay? Walk. Then consciously thank God for everything that is still good. Doesn't matter if you're depressed. Doesn't matter if you don't feel it. Doesn't matter. Consciously tell God, verbally if necessary, what is good in your life. And here's where the transformation happens. Here's where the depression lifts. You got to be doing that other stuff too. Look at the beauty of nature and take it in. So don't just look at the sky and say, oh, it's blue, and look down. Look at the sky and drink in the blue. Look at the trees and drink in the green. Look at the flowers. Drink in their shape, their color, their movement in the wind. Open your ears and hear the birds. Watch how they fly. And you have to drink this in. You have to drink this in. And if you do that, what will happen is the energy of your soul, which is directed to your mind, causing the depression, will be directed outward, because it will touch God and God will touch you, because God mediates himself through beauty. That's why the creation is beautiful. That's why the creation is beautiful. It's so that God could reveal himself to us. Sometimes we can't hear him. Sometimes we have trouble finding him. But he's always there. He's always there, right? If we open the eyes of our heart to the beauty that is around us, I guarantee you your depression will lift. Because you know what depression really is? It's when the energy of the soul is directed to the mind. A depression is when your mind is running at 220, even though your brain is designed to at 110. Okay? And it'll appear in 2 ways. You either get manic, get ideas that you're going to save the world, or more commonly, you get controlled by difficult thoughts, usually about problems you're facing. And you just can't let go of the thoughts. The thoughts actually grab a hold of you. Well, they're hyper-energized. That's the problem. And what we got to do is we got to bring our bodies back into balance, the energies of our bodies back into balance, right? And we do that through this exercise. And I got to tell you, 90% of the time it works. It works. That's the therapy for depression. And it's just bringing the energies of your body, your physical energy, your mental energy, and your spiritual energy back into balance. But remember that the soul, the longing of the soul is always for communion with God. You know how passions arise in us? Passions. They arise when the energy of the soul is directed into the body. That's how passions arise. Sin is looking for the life that only God can give in places where God is not. That's why we call it sin. It leads to death. What is death? Death is a place empty of God. That's what it is, right? And so that's why we fast. That's why we learn how to practice what we call ascetic self-discipline. Okay, that's why we learn how to bring our bodies into control, because what that does is bring healing to the soul. So the energy that's being dissipated through the body is really directed back towards God, just like it is with the exercise of opening our hearts to the beauty of nature. So that tells us something about nature. And it's that nature tells us something about the character of God. The whole creation understood this until modernity, until about 200 years ago. Something switched. Man became the object of his own contemplation rather than God through nature. Now, when you remember that, these verses start to make sense, because they're written to a person, let's call it, with an old world understanding, which has been lost. That's been lost. You know, the maladies of the old times in the agrarian society had to do with the vicissitudes of nature, and it compelled man to seek God. But ever since the switch, the inversion, where man becomes the object of his own study and thus the center of the universe, of his own universe, all the afflictions, they change. They become bodily and psychological. That's what happens. The afflictions that modern man suffers from are mental afflictions. And so the church, and through these hymns and through the beauty of the church, that's why churches have to be beautiful. That's why they have to be beautiful. The art can't be kitschy. The art has to be good. In fact, it should be the best. Right? This is why. So when we come in, and even though we might not be consciously aware of it, our soul is, and we're uplifted. So orthodoxy is kind of old world. That's why when you walk in, you might not be able to explain it, but you can sense it. You can sense it. Sometimes if you're ever here alone, or you can even do it right now, you know, God inhabits the space of the church. He inhabits the space. Very easy to perceive when no one is here. Sometimes what I'll do is when I talk to somebody, we talk in the office, but I also like to talk on that back pew. I say, let's go in the church and talk. And we sit on that back pew, we see the altar, right? The light is coming in through the window, and it reflects off the icons, and you can feel the presence of God. You can feel the presence of God very easily. Try it sometimes. Just walk in here and tell me that you don't sense God. You will sense God, because he's here. Okay, this nature is filled with the presence of God. It really is. But it's localized, of course, in the church. So we have this switch, and so for us, in modernity, we're in a project of recovery, is really what we're in. We're in a project, and the project is the recovery. It's a recovery of truth. Begins in our own heart and our own redemption, and many of you are experiencing dimensions of that. It's really quite remarkable. Remember, progress is incremental, okay? One step at a time, but many of you are experiencing that. That is the redemption. That is the restoration. That is salvation. So open your hearts and eyes to beauty, and that whole process will accelerate and will be magnified. That's what the creation was for. That's what it's for. Right? That's why it's beautiful. Ask yourself, how come a healthy tree is so gorgeous? How come the clouds, especially here in Florida, are like dynamic sculptures in the sky? And if you want to bring yourself into balance, put a prayer rope on your little turning column, stick, on your steering column, right, a small one. And as you're driving, say the Jesus prayer, and keep your eyes on the road and all that. But as you're driving, look at the blue of the sky, look at the clouds, look at the beauty, and say the Jesus prayer. I'm telling you, it'll bring you back into balance in short order. These are the tools that God gives us. They're the tools that God gives us, but we're blind to it. We're blind to it because we don't understand anymore what I just described. But it's objectively true. It's objectively true. Right? And when I say it's objectively true, what I'm saying is that that's the way reality really works. That's been inverted in modernity. We only see kind of like the mechanical utility of things, and our eyes becomes closed to the beauty. But we've got to open our eyes to the beauty, because that's what's primary. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. This is physical reality. The heavens proclaim the glory of God, the firmament. I love Old English. The firmament proclaims his handiwork. And when we connect with that, when our soul connects with that, we are made whole. We are made whole. Now that was the understanding of the writer of the Jacobse hymn. That was the understanding in which much of our worship was written. So struggle with it. It feels foreign. Of course it does. But struggle with it. Struggle with it. Because the fruit of that struggle is enlightenment. Enlightenment of how the world is really created, but then also the self-revelation of God within it. You see why this is important? There's no other place left where this knowledge is preserved. It's only preserved in the church. That's the only place. You can't find this anymore. There's an attempt to recover it in different parts of the culture because people understand there's a real deep spiritual vacuum and something has been lost. So there are great attempts to recover it, and some of it will be recovered for historical reasons that are very interesting, but I'll go into that some other time, okay? But here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Laying